It was November 24th, 1971, a cold, gray afternoon before Thanksgiving in the Pacific Northwest. Passengers boarded Northwest Orient Flight 305, a short trip from Portland, Oregon to Seattle. Nothing about that flight seemed unusual. Business travelers, families, tired workers heading home for the holidays. The air smelled faintly of coffee and cigarettes, the low hum of the engines filling the cabin as people settled into their seats. But among them sat one man who would change history forever, a man who would vanish into the night and become one of the greatest unsolved mysteries America has ever known. Before I take you deeper into this story, if you're fascinated by unsolved mysteries, chilling true crime cases, and stories that linger long after they're told, make sure to subscribe to this channel. We share stories just like this. Stories that haunt, stories that puzzle, and stories that refuse to die. Now, back to Flight 305. He was described as ordinary, mid-40s, dressed in a neatly pressed suit, black tie, and a white shirt. A man who looked more like a salesman or a government clerk than the central figure of mystery that would baffle investigators for decades. His name, or at least the name he gave, was Dan Cooper. The world would come to know him simply as D.B. Cooper. As the aircraft lifted off the runway in Portland, Cooper sat calmly in seat 18C. He wasn't restless. He wasn't nervous. He ordered a drink, bourbon and soda, as though he had nowhere urgent to be. Then, without any hint of panic or hesitation, he handed a folded note to a flight attendant named Florence Schaffner. At first, she thought it was just another man trying to slip her his phone number. She tucked it into her pocket, uninterested. But Cooper leaned toward her, his voice low, calm, almost chillingly polite. "Miss," he said, "you'd better read that note. I have something important to tell you." When she opened it, her world changed instantly. The note was short and direct. It told her he had something that gave him complete control of the plane. There were no raised voices, no dramatic gestures, just the quiet, steady presence of a man who seemed to know exactly what he was doing. Florence's hands trembled as she looked at him, trying to gauge whether he was serious. Cooper nodded once, confirming silently. And in that moment, the cabin of Flight 305 became a stage set for one of the most infamous mysteries in American history. He instructed her to sit beside him. In that calm, composed manner, he laid out what he wanted: $200,000 in cash for parachutes, and a fuel truck ready in Seattle to refuel the plane for the next leg of his plan. His voice carried no malice, no wild emotion. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't cruel. He was methodical, almost businesslike. What unsettled the crew most was how normal he seemed. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't loud. He was in control, and everyone felt it. While other hijackers of the era often used anger and threats, Cooper relied on a chilling calmness that made resistance feel impossible. Meanwhile, the passengers in the cabin carried on unaware. They laughed, read magazines, and sipped coffee. They had no idea that the man in the suit and tie at the back of the plane had quietly taken control of all their lives. By the time the plane touched down in Seattle, darkness had fallen. Outside, FBI agents scrambled with the ransom money and parachutes Cooper had demanded. Inside, the tension was palpable. The crew tried to mask their fear, carrying out his instructions with shaking hands. And yet, Cooper never raised his voice. He reassured them he didn't want to harm anyone. He only wanted what he asked for. The exchange went smoothly. Passengers were released, walking out into night air, completely unaware they had just been part of a hijacking. For them, it was over. For Cooper, it was only beginning. Once the cabin was empty except for flight crew, Cooper ordered the plane to take off again, this time heading south toward Mexico. But his instructions to the pilots were unusual. He wanted the plane to fly low, under 10,000 feet at a slow speed, with the landing gear partially lowered. These were not the requests of a man making it up as he went along. These were the requests of someone who knew exactly what he needed. As the storm winds howled and rain lashed against the fuselage, Cooper prepared for his final act. In the rear of the plane, he opened the staircase door, a deafening roar filling the cabin. The crew caught glimpses of him, steady and calm, strapping the money to himself. parachute in place. And then, without hesitation, he stepped into the night, a man carrying $200,000 in cash, disappearing into a storm over the forests of Washington. No one saw him land. No one saw him again. The FBI launched one of the largest investigations in American history. Hundreds of agents searched forests, rivers, mountains, anywhere Cooper could have landed. They interviewed suspects, tracked leads, followed false confessions. But nothing. It was as if Cooper had been swallowed by the night itself. Over the years, fragments of the mystery surfaced. A boy digging by the Columbia River in 1980 discovered a bundle of cash, rotting bills that matched the serial numbers of Cooper's ransom money. But no body, no parachute, no trace of the man himself. Theories exploded. Some believe he didn't survive the jump, that the storm, the freezing night, and the rough terrain claimed his life. Others swore he lived, that Cooper slipped into a new identity, spending the stolen money carefully, always one step ahead. Some suggested he was a military veteran, trained in parachuting. Others thought he might have been an ordinary man who simply disappeared into history, leaving behind the most perfect unsolved crime America had ever seen. Witness descriptions painted him as polite, even courteous. He tipped generously. He smiled faintly at the flight attendants. He never harmed a single person on that plane. It was as though he wanted to be remembered not as a monster, but as a man who pulled off something impossible, and then vanished, leaving behind only questions. Decades passed. The FBI officially closed the case in 2016 after exhausting every lead. And yet, Cooper's shadow lingers. Every so often, new suspects emerge, new theories ignite. But the truth remains locked away in the cold November night when a man in a suit walked onto a plane and simply disappeared. Even today, we don't know if he lived or died. We don't know if he was a criminal mastermind or a desperate man chasing freedom. All we know is that somewhere between Portland and Seattle, in the dark skies above the storm, D.B. Cooper leapt into legend. And maybe that's the greatest mystery of all. Not just what happened to him, but why he did it. Was it for money? For the thrill? Or was it something deeper, something only he understood? No one knows. Perhaps no one ever will. But one thing is certain. The story of D.B. Cooper is more than a crime. It is a haunting reminder of how fragile certainty really is, how one ordinary man can step onto a plane and become eternal. A ghost in the storm, a name whispered for generations, a legend who vanished into thin air.